Next on News Talk, AM 1480 WLEA, The Newsmaker Show with Kevin Doran.
It's Brian O'Neill in for Kevin Doran on The Newsmaker Show today, on with U.S.-UN report and correspondent and former ABC reporter Tom Osborne. Tom, thanks for calling in today.
Good to talk to you.
Tom Osborne, first off, you covered the United Nations at U.S.-UN report. Wanted to ask you about the UN's role in this current situation in Iraq. Now, some critics of the UN would say, in sometimes kind of a knee-jerk way, that the U.S. just does what the UN wants, but a quick Google search of the United Nations and United States turns up pages and pages of how the UN criticized the U.S. So how much influence does the UN have right now on President Obama's administration?
Well, that's a good question. I think the president has been somewhat behind the scenes with his UN efforts, particularly in some of these hot spots. I don't think he wants to appear as his critics fault him, sort of leading from behind. But in many cases, rather than leading from behind, he's been leading up front of the United Nations in many of the crucial backroom talks. Particularly, we should look at the long sessions, the 2-year session, the 3 or 4 year sessions they've been having with Iran. Most of these talks initiated within the United Nations. So the Obama administration has been rather deft at using the UN, perhaps not putting it out front, but certainly using the back rooms. And I think we should be thankful that those talks with Iran have taken place, because now we know that they're going to be very, very critical in what happens throughout the region at this point.
Last Friday, and this was before the president announced that troops were going back in, CNN asked the president on the White House lawn about sending soldiers back into Iraq.
We're not going to allow ourselves to be dragged back into a situation in which, while we're there, we're keeping a lid on things, and after enormous sacrifices by us, as soon as we're not there, suddenly people end up acting in ways that are not conducive to the long-term stability and prosperity of the country.
Tom Osborne, the Iraqi ambassador Daley, was asked by Wolf Blitzer shortly after that if changes to the U.S. are made in Iraq, would they be long-lasting?
The question is, if the U.S. goes in a little bit and then leaves, are you just going to go back to what you're doing right now?
As I said, the issue we have is not an internal issue. The issue we have is an impact of Syria. The issue we have is a threat to the region. We have asked for some time that we need to be supported. The U.S. has supported us, but what we need now is an immediate threat.
Tom Osborne, your response to what the president and Ambassador Daley said in those clips?
Well, of course, we know that the president has already decided to send about 275 troops to protect the embassy in Baghdad. This is an emergency operation. But, of course, let's look back at what happened in Iraq. This is a failure by the Maliki government to follow through on the number of promises both made to the United States and the international community, and more importantly, to the political leadership in Iraq. He has, Maliki that is, has failed to integrate the Sunni political leadership into his government. He's engaged in putting together an exclusive sectarian state. And now we're seeing the results of all of that at this point, and it is very dangerous effects for Syria and the region. But the result of this is a terrible breakdown between the Syria border and the Iraqi border, an infusion of a great many foreign fighters. Now, critics have been quick to say that we should have left a residual force. Well, we do have a residual force there, and, of course, there's additional contingents. But the fact is that what happened was at the end of 2011, the U.S. withdrew forces after 8.5 years of war in Iraq. We tried to get a status of forces agreement, which is critical from the Iraqi government to provide the protections our soldiers need if we're going to stay. The government couldn't provide it, and I would say they couldn't provide it for political reasons. I don't think they could get it. So that would be my basic response. I mean, this is a very important step we're taking here. It's contingent, but one of the things that have to happen, two things. We have to stop ISIS from taking Baghdad. That's the immediate crisis. And we also have to sit people down at the table for once and for all. This is the political process that has to take place. A military solution is not possible for us. That process would put on one side of the table Iran, which will represent the Shia world, and the other Saudi Arabia, which will represent the Sunni world. This is going to take a couple of years, but there has to be a balance between Iran, Saudi Arabia, the Shia, and the Sunni.
NBC News reports that right now a lot of people are trying to flee Baghdad. Here's NBC's Richard Engel.
Baghdad is very tense. A lot of people have left this city. There are checkpoints all across Baghdad. Of course, the giant U.S. embassy is right in the center of Baghdad. The U.S. military is deploying 170 extra soldiers and Marines to provide direct security at the embassy, also deploying an extra 100 troops to the region to set up emergency airfields and manage those airfields should an emergency evacuation be necessary.
Tom Osborne, any thoughts on that report from Richard Engel of NBC?
Well, following on from what Richard says, we have several things that we can do, but not much. We should, as he says, send in the contingency troops we need to take care of our interests, our immediate interests in Baghdad, the embassy, and so on. We have to support the Iraqi government with its counterterrorism efforts, and I think we have to provide intelligence material, and we have to do this quickly, as we are doing, I think. But we also have to provide advice and planners to get on the Iraqi ground. That doesn't mean troops on the ground, but we need contacts on the ground because these things have to be coordinated, particularly when you're talking about surgical military strikes.
Here's a part of an interview Gordon Deal on the Wall Street Journal radio show had with Wall Street Journal reporter Ellen Nickmeyer about how America had been trying to convince the head of Iraq not to alienate others in power.
For years, there have been warnings from the U.S. and others that Maliki was just kind of storing up trouble by denying kind of a share of power to others in the country, and that it could cause trouble down the road, and that's what's happened.
Now, is it Maliki who's asked for help from the U.S. to ward off ISIS?
That's right. Maliki, she's asked for help from the U.S. with airstrikes and for the U.S. to give the Iraqi army more weapons and more help. But the Iraqi army, when it surrendered in some of these towns that were captured by ISIS, they left behind their weapons and their vehicles and everything. So it's been quite a boon for the ISIS group to sweep up all these weapons left behind.
So, Tom Osborne, has the U.S. seen problems coming all along here?
Well, we have. As I said, Brian, we've been trying to get the status agreement in Iraq for the last 2.5 years. I think all you have to do is look at what's happening on the ground. Look in Mosul. We had 800 fighters knock off 30,000 troops. This is a bigger problem than supply or logistical issues. This is a morale problem. It's a management of military problem. Now that's a political issue, and there's a reason that the Sunnis in the western part of Iraq have allowed this to happen. This is not how the Iraqi people want to live in a government that's sectarian, with all these sectarian divisions. This is a testament to the fact that we have not had the kind of political inclusiveness that we need. Any direct military action, though, taken by the president has to be, and as he has demanded, contingent upon seeing the Iraqi government take steps toward an inclusive government of the Sunnis, to bring in competent military leadership now, to get the Iraqi government to stand up, and to get a competent Iraqi ground force going. Maliki, it's not clear that he can pull this off at this point. I think we have a real problem here, though, as I mentioned before, because now we have a lot of foreign fighters coming back, and maybe then to the United States.
Now, NBC News also reports that the Iraqi Prime Minister's cabinet, which NBC says is Shiite-dominated, has accused the Saudis of promoting genocide by backing the Sunni militias in Iraq. Wondering if, in your work at the UN-U.S. report, if you've spoken with the Iraqi ambassador or the U.S. ambassador to Iraq or any other diplomats on this long and complex relationship between these groups.
Not directly, not the current ambassador. I have talked to some of the former diplomats who advised, and of course it's very difficult to choose sides right now, and that's one of the huge problems that we have. We're actually formed an alliance with Iran, and I'm not quite sure where that leads, because this is going to be a terrible problem pushing through the whole region, and I doubt that Iran is going to be backing up once they get into place.
We hear some on the left saying that the current problems in Iraq were caused by both the Bush presidencies and their wars in Iraq, while some on the right say that the problem was that the U.S. pulled out in 2011. Your take on the liberal and conservative explanations about why things are a problem now in Iraq?
Well, I think that's part of the problem. We divided this up into liberal and conservative political, I guess you'd say, platforms from either side. But, the point is that there is no liberal or conservative answer. The bottom line is that we have to get a legal framework we have to get a government standing up with Maliki and to stop the sectarian efforts that he's been carrying out up to this point.
We've been in negotiations with Iran for 2 years. Your take on the Iranians having a role in this current Iraq situation?
Well, the Iranian government, of course, has been in discussions, as I said, with the United States on its nuclear program. I don't think that this can be solved without some sort of Iranian input. Let's face it, they're influential in the regimes going all the way up through Syria. But I would return to my original thoughts, and that is that we need to put a political process on the table. That is Iran on one side, representing the Shia world, and the Saudi Arabia and the Sunni world on the other. There's got to be a political solution to this. There's not going to be a military solution. We've seen what a military solution is doing in Syria. Basically, it's a raging fire out of control that just has to burn itself out. There's another aspect to this that we need to look at, and it's probably in the future, but the United Nations in 2005 adopted the responsibility to protect. Every major government head of state signed on to this. And, this was passed, of course, without teeth. It's something we have to implement with our political will. But here we are standing and watching now, how many years later, thousands and thousands being just slaughtered without any thought. And this is where the world has to sit back and start looking at political solutions. The United States is no longer going to be able to intervene in these situations. And there isn't any other government as powerful as we are. We can help from the back, we can help from the front, we can help from the sides, but we all have to sit down at the table.
We're talking with Tom Osborne of the U.S.-UN Report, formerly of ABC. So far, we've been talking about Iraq. When we get back, we'll find out what Tom thinks about the capture of a Benghazi suspect just arrested in Libya, the Benghazi attack in 2012, and the political aftermath in the U.S. Back on the Newsmaker Show, Brian O'Neill in for Kevin Doran. We're on with Tom Osborne of U.S.-UN Report, formerly of ABC News, where he worked with Peter Jennings. Tom, NBC's Pete Williams says this is not the first time that the U.S. has tried to arrest Ahmad Abu Khattala.
Last year, there was an attempt to arrest him in Libya that didn't work. But this administration official says that Khattala has been in an unusual situation because not only has he been on the run from the U.S., but he's also out of favor with the current government in Libya. So he was under pressure from both sides.
And the suspect in the Benghazi attack, which was September 11, 2012, he's not just unpopular with the U.S.
This individual will now face the full weight of the American justice system, President Obama says in a statement about the capture of Ahmed Abu Khattala, considered a ringleader in the Benghazi attacks. He was taken by U.S. forces in Libya over the weekend and is now being held outside that country. Khattala openly admitted in some print interviews to being the mastermind of the attacks that killed 4 Americans, including Ambassador Chris Stevens, in September 2012.
NBC's Bob Constantini there. Tom Osborne, the GOP accused the Democrats of dragging their feet on Benghazi. Do you think the pressure put on the White House and the Democrats from the Republicans has anything to do with this week's arrest of Khattala?
Well, I do. Of course it has. It has a lot to do with it. I mean, this has become a political football, tragically so, with lives lost. Diplomats of great importance to our country have been lost. Their deaths, a tragedy. But it has become a political football. But the important thing is that we do have a suspect now, and perhaps we'll get down to the bottom of what actually happened, and I think we'll find that that as many diplomatic, and I can attest to this myself, many diplomatic outposts are very dangerous. And, our diplomats risk their lives every day. And this didn't turn out too well. Ambassador Stevens was a guy who really was committed to his job, was willing to take risks, and unfortunately that was a very tragic evening. But I'm glad that we have this arrest, and perhaps we'll get down to the bottom of this and we can cut out all the politics.
Wondering, Tom, have you been following the House hearings on Benghazi, and any thoughts there?
None other than just, as I've said, I think it's a good thing that they're having these. The administration has agreed to participate in them. I think it's more to kind of watch the proceedings and step in when they feel like they're being maligned. But I'm afraid that's kind of a political sideshow as well. The Obama administration, as is indicated by this arrest, is very much involved in trying to get to the bottom of the actual facts.
Tom Osborne of US-UN Report. We're down to just a couple of minutes. Any final thoughts about our conversation before we go?
Only that thank you, Brian, for your attention to this program. It's an excellent and important program. I just think that Americans, I would just say, like to get in and get out. This is not going to happen in this region. Whether we like it or not, whichever part we play, it's going to be for the long term. And I think the most that we can do is use our diplomats to get these different sections of that region sitting at the same table and begin to talk about how we can solve this outside of a military solution.
Tom, you said off the air that you love to hear from people and you don't mind corresponding back and forth with email. What's your email?
My email is tomosborne48@yahoo.com. That's also for US-UN Report.
Tom Osborne 48@yahoo.com.
You got it.
Tom Osborne of US-UN Report, formerly ABC. Thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Brian. Best to you.
And NBC News is next on AM 1480 WLEA Hornell. WLEA Hornell. WLEA